2023 is definitely the year for CRPGs, and it's about to end in a big way with Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. I got a chance to play the full version early thanks to the wonderful people over at KhrazeGaming, and there are lots of things that I wished I would have known sooner. That's why today we're gonna go over everything you need for a perfect start and some of the biggest mistakes to avoid while navigating the dark future. Also super excited to say that this video is actually being sponsored by Owlcat Games, so totally check it out by following the links below. You're not going to regret it. Now, just like in any RPG, there are multiple classes to choose from called Archetypes. There are 4 starting ones at level 1, including Warrior, Officer, Operative, and Soldier. However, each and every single one of these can eventually branch out into up to 3 of the 6 advanced classes coming out at level 16, which of course all have their own unique skill trees and further synergies. But eventually at max level, there's an additional one at level 36, called Exemplar, which provides more general types of buffs for every single subclass. However, your origin as well as homeworld can further provide even more skills to augment these classes that can be just as important. This of course will require a longer discussion, so we're going to cover that in a future video. In the meantime, I will cover some of these starting classes if you want to decide on an early archetype. Starting with the Warrior, this is your classic melee fighter with lots of mobility via skills like the charge, as well as passives that can restore extra movement points in combat. But they can be spec'd in a bunch of ways, including to fill a more tanky role if you need it, by going with the Vanguard archetype at level 16. This is perfectly suited to soak a lot of damage, distract enemies' attacks from your team upon you by taunt abilities, and so on. But you can also spec this into Assassin, which focuses a lot more on agility and damage, though in this game you can almost create a sort of warrior/rogue hybrid that can both attack from the shadows and still go face to face against almost anybody. Plus the class focuses a lot on parries too, making it great at avoiding damage and even counterattacking with abilities such as the defensive stance. Then there's the Officer, probably my favorite class in the entire game and honestly something that every setup out there should have. A dedicated leader is almost a must here because it can provide a ton of benefits, including extra turns for your allies via abilities like Bring It Down and Finest Hour. Plus, along the way, there are lots of buffs that can further provide additional benefits to your allies, including improving their survivability, removing status effects, and even generating a lot more momentum. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, as well as why it is very important. Now, if the Officer was the one providing buffs in combat, the Operative is the one doing the opposite by providing debuffs to your enemies, especially in the case of applying stacks of exploits to every single one of your targets. So the more exploits you apply to your targets, the more you can cripple them, increasing in the process your entire team's damage against them. But there are many other benefits too, such as, for example, reducing their own stats, penetrating defenses, all the way to even limiting the movement that they have on the battlefield. Again, Operative is an amazing class to have and can fit a whole bunch of different roles, from damage all the way to pure support. Finally, we have the Soldier, or formerly known as Marksman, and for good reason, because this makes an excellent sniper and complete enemy mower via ability weapons such as the burst shot. Your keystone feature here is called Run and Gun, which gives you the unique ability to exceed your attack limit and shoot more times in the same turn, which can help a ton as many abilities will provide amazing bonuses to your own damage with higher kill counts. Also, skills like the Concentrated and the Rapid Fire will completely mow down entire groups of enemies if you have a proper bolter gun. Playing as a ranged class in general in this game is more advantageous, as there are some very strong early weapons that can greatly benefit your entire build. This brings us to the combat, and if you played any CRPGs lately, which I assume you did because we covered Baldur's Gate extensively on the channel, you're probably familiar with the whole movement and attack point system, so yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. Also, that generally ambushing enemies in this game will provide you a very unique mechanic. At the start of the fight, basically, you can position your party however you want and also get the upper hand if you do it properly before combat ensues. But the two more important mechanics I will focus on are Momentum and Veil Degradation. So let's start with momentum. Think of this as the resource that fuels your ultimate abilities, called heroic acts and desperate measures. Basically, the more enemies you defeat in combat, the more you increase that momentum, but other things can also influence its gain rate, such as the fellowship stat and other abilities that interact with it. On the contrary, momentum decreases naturally when using your own skills, but also when having your own allies falling in battle. So what this means is that if you perform well in battle, you get greatly rewarded with a strong ultimate, but even if you don't and suffer heavy losses, you still have a desperate measure ability to rely on. Now, the difference between heroic acts and desperate measures is that the former provides only advantages, usually massive, while the latter comes with some disadvantages. So for example, the warrior's daring breach heroic act essentially gives you no limit to the number of attacks for that turn, as well as a lot of movement bonus to completely go over the entire battlefield. However, its desperate measures counterpart gives a penalty to your movement points and even makes your charge ability unusable until the end of combat. But this of course is going to be different for each and every single archetype. The next mechanic that I find very cool is Veil Degradation, and this is based around the idea that if you use the dark powers of the warp, monstrous creatures from beyond the veil can manifest themselves eventually into the physical realm. So when you have a Psyker in your party, which is very beneficial by the way, as they can have some very strong abilities, the more they use these powers, the more they affect the veil, to the point that they're going to eventually trigger progressively more dangerous phenomena. So this can range from just getting randomly zapped by damage and pushed back, all the way to summoning hellish chaos spawns that can be really annoying to deal with early on. Now, they also tend to consume human souls to power themselves up, which is why it's best to clear all other enemies up first and then leave these hellish spawns for last. Now, the other important combat mechanic to pay attention to is cover. So by breaking line of sight, staying behind obstacles will make you very hard to hit and soak in a ton of damage. There are two types of cover depending on the shields. So full cover, which is indicated by the skull shield, this reduces the chance to get hit by default by 60%, but of course this will depend on your difficulty settings. And then there's partial cover indicated by the half-filled shield. This reduces the hit chance only by 35%. Of course, it goes without saying that this only works against ranged attacks, as melee and AoE can still hit you, especially if enemies are pretty much right next to you. Also, cover elements can still be broken, leaving you exposed, and even gaps in full cover can be a way for snipers to still hit you from very far away if they get that chance. On a final note, the only other thing I will cover about combat is of course the fact that at the end of fights, your characters get fully restored to max HP. Even if they got downed in battle, as long as you won, everyone gets back to full wounds without requiring any type of rest. The only exception to that rule is trauma, which is completely different and can only be removed by going back to your void chip. And this can provide some very big and crippling debuffs, that's why you want to remove them ASAP. So while trauma can be caused by prolonged combat too, they can especially be caused, and you should pay attention to not falling into traps too often. Otherwise, you will quickly get affected by multiple debuffs that can seriously affect your performance in battle. Moving on to number 3, yeah, the game is absolutely riddled with choices from the main story all the way to the side content, which lets you choose very different paths depending on the choices, which is going to bring you all sorts of different outcomes. And this is generally handled by your conviction. Do you center your existence around your belief system and want to serve humanity by destroying everything that's unknown and alien? Then you can pick a dogmatic path. On the contrary, if you prefer chaos, corruption, and forbidden knowledge, then heretic is better suited. But there are also ways to be more neutral and even follow a more idealistic route that's based more around the idea of compassion via the iconoclast. Each of these choices, in fact, will further power up separate path skill trees that can provide additional bonuses when going deeper into those convictions. Plus, there are even items in the game that specifically benefit and will require you to have a certain level in these convictions before using them. However, other choices are a lot more nuanced. In many situations, you can help out certain characters with their own problems, which in turn can make them ally with you. and this in turn can even let you bring them in combat. In fact, many of your companions can be recruited in this way by essentially choosing to help them out with their own problems. I also suggest, on the other hand, to always pick the option to intervene personally in many situations, as this will let you actually visit places you might otherwise miss. And in turn, this can give you rooms filled with loot and even unique items that otherwise you might just completely skip upon. Which brings us to number 4, and loot is absolutely huge in this game, which is why exploration is such a big part of a rogue trader's daily routine, be it if we're talking about planet or even deep space exploration. First of all, always pay close attention to your environment and use both the advanced view via the tab button on the PC, as well as the map to open up any loot containers left unchecked. There are lots of build enhancing items even from early on, but you'll also often find out some of these trading goods that are very needed to quickly farm reputation, so more on that in just a little bit. Also, for those familiar with the genre, having a high awareness character also helps to spot things in the environment easier, either hidden treasures or even traps that might be there to prevent you from opening said treasures. Oftentimes, in fact, treasures can be unlocked via special keys, but also try to use your tech skills first. Usually these are simple skill checks that happen automatically, and then you can keep these keys and other similar items for when it's truly needed or when you cannot open them otherwise. Now, many of these items can be in fact traded with a handful of factions that you'll come across in your galactic adventures to further improve your reputation with them and gain access to unique rewards. Many vendors, in fact, can be encountered in random locations or on trading vessels out in space, though at first it might appear that you're locked out of buying anything that they have for sale. And that is because you will need to improve two things. One is the reputation, the other one is the profit factor. So reputation can easily be improved by simply trading the access items from your cargo. This both includes those extra crates that you find everywhere, but also duplicate items. And since you'll be getting dozens, if not hundreds, of the same armors and weapons eventually, you can just place these into your cargo by going back to the captain's quarters and doing it from right here. And then from that point on, you can trade those as well as the crates and gain thousands upon thousands of extra reputation. Split stacking is also possible, by the way, if you don't want to outright give out everything. You can eventually also quickly check all your standing from the reputations tab in the character's menu. The other resource mentioned was profit factor, as reputation on its own won't be enough. So profit factor, you can think of this as a measurement of your wealth as well as your connection, and there are many ways to improve it. This includes naturally from progressing in the main story and completing side missions. Also, dialogue decisions and the way you solve side quests can also provide extra profit rating, like for example confiscating somebody's inheritance can totally do that. But the best way is to colonize planets. We're gonna talk about that in just a little bit, but I found that to be by far the best way that can easily snowball in the middle to late game. Now, profit factor can also decrease, so for example, respecking your characters often, which will cost increasingly more profit factor each time, can actually consume quite a bit of it. But once items are accessible at vendors, you do not need any money to buy them, you can just grab everything right away, which I find to be really useful. Now, since we were talking about colonization, after being done with the prologue, the space map opens up, and then you can start scanning and warping to other solar systems. Scanning reveals routes of different difficulties, with green indicating a safe route, but the red ones obviously indicate danger. This in turn can increase the chance that you get invaded by various entities from beyond the veil, so warp creatures that can jump on your ship. But you can also reduce the chance of that happening by spending Navigator's Insight to reduce a route's difficulty. Insight, of course, is a resource that you get by simply scanning, so the more systems you reveal with it, the more insight you will get. This can also be used to create additional routes, by the way, that normally don't exist between two destinations, so this can be a great way to move from one to another if it's very far away. Which brings us to number 8. When visiting a new system, there are many opportunities presenting themselves to acquire more resources or solving problems and just exercising your God-given right to rule. So pay special attention to the scannable planets, as oftentimes they can feature minerals and other resources that you can mine. You will need extractors for these, but you will get plenty from quests and even buying these from vendors. Plus, planet resources are useful to also complete contracts, which is another great way to increase profit factor. But besides this, you can also actually set up and govern your actual colonies, which you can progressively upgrade and even specialize through multiple unique stages of development. This can give you extra items, resources, but also influence the very people under your protection. However, it's a very lucrative way to get a lot of profit factor up fast. So as new projects get resolved over time, you can make up new ones and really snowball all of this, especially as you progress in the game and once you get at least a few colonies going. And of course, you can quickly check out and manage your colonies from the appropriate management page to make everything easier. And finally, the one thing we haven't talked about is space combat. Now, you get to pick your starting ship during the character creation, and it's absolutely needed as you will oftentimes get to engage in space combat, especially with pirates. This is also a very lucrative way to gain additional scraps, which is needed to upgrade and boost up your ship. Also extra XP to level it up because it also has its own leveling system with skills that provide extra abilities, plus occasional weaponries, much better than your own to replace them. Don't get fooled by the 2D playing space. You will need to be good at maneuvering and positioning. So like for example, knowing the travel pattern of enemy torpedoes can be an excellent way to completely avoid all of that damage while simultaneously setting up your own. Maneuvering is also important as some of your weaponry can only be shot from certain sides and they usually have limited range, so you do have to be careful about that. Furthermore, characters can be put at the command of each individual aspect of that ship and they will give extra abilities on top of the ones that the ship already has, assuming that you of course unlock them via the skill tree. You can see these in the character feature screen too, or when you slot the characters in their respective posts. But ships can be upgraded. There's a whole system about it that is based on the scraps that you get, and as you level up, gain XP from combat, you will improve your odds more and more even against the toughest challenges. Anyway, that is about it with the video. Again, totally check out Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader using the links down below, and of course there are going to be a lot more videos following soon on the channel. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching and until next time.